Well, kia ora and morning, and thank you for having me. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Lisa, for this opportunity to share some thoughts and ideas with your members. It's a real honour. It's a real pleasure. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about. Um, so today, I come to this topic of creating a vision, or holding a vision, or making a vision for our loved ones, for our family members, with two hats on. So my first hat and primary hat is a parent of three children. My wife and I have three children. Our eldest has significant disability, significant health challenges. She spends incredible amounts of time in hospital. She's actually there now. She's been there for 6 months, and we're trying to plan to get her out. And we've got interviews going on today. So my wife and my daughter will be interviewing potential staff for her return home today. So that sort of, give you a little bit of a sense of our life and the background as a family. And also my second hat is really as someone who's worked in the field for many years. And I first came into the world of disability in my early 20s as a young man, and it just took my heart. And I've been here ever since. And I'm not a young man anymore. So it's a while now. It's a couple of times. So both sort of hats I bring to this topic. And really, I'd really want to thank, I need to thank all the people, all the families, all the individuals that I've sort of engaged with over the years, because that's where I've learned most of what I'm going to talk today about. From a very practical position, I've learned things theoretically. So I've been to workshops and training, and lots of people have taught me things, but actually it's the application. It's when we apply our learning. It's when we do something with it that we find out whether it's real or not. And so all of the families that I've engaged with over the years that have been gracious and willing to have me in their homes, many times just sitting around their kitchen table or with big sheets of paper up on their walls and drawing pictures all over the place, and many conversations. I just really want to thank all of them for they're a part of today's presentation. If it's good, thank them. If it's bad, it's me. It's all on me. All right, so this is the little organization that I work for now, and you can track us down easy enough if you're interested. And today's topic really is about vision, as we've said, what it means and how to get one if you don't have one. So this is not a new idea, having a vision. It's very ancient. It's thousands and thousands of years old. This idea that we have to have a sense of where we're going and what we're doing. And here's a quote from Helen Keller, which says, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision." And so for me, that speaks a bit to our topic today. This isn't just about seeing. This isn't just about being able to see something. This is about being able to sort of, you could say, see it in our mind's eye, be able to imagine it before it's real, be able to sort of picture it in our thoughts before it becomes a reality. And I think for me, that's what Helen's talking about, at least in part here. Here's another book that many people would know, very old, thousands of years old, and it says in Proverbs 29, verse 18, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And so this idea that we're going to talk about today isn't a new idea. I think it's really important for us to get our heads around that. This is not about disability per se. This is about humanity. This is about life. This is about humans. This is about people figuring out where they're going to go. But for many of our loved ones, the people that we are here for or learning about, in a sense, it's more important. It's just more important. It's not that it's the only importance. So really, vision in the context that we will talk about it is around loved ones, is around people with disabilities, is around folks who need help to create a vision, who can't necessarily go out and do it all themselves. But let's not forget that this is just actually a very human pursuit, very human issue. Here's this next slide says vision versus planning. And what I've found over the years is that these two terms can easily be used interchangeably. And people talk about planning as if it's visioning, and they talk about visioning as if it's planning. And my experience is those two things are actually quite different. But sometimes the language that gets used sort of would help us, or have us believe that they're the same thing, or they're being done at the same time. And so I just, a couple of thoughts on trying to separate out this idea of visioning so we can focus on what we're talking about versus planning. And I'll start with planning because many people, if you've been in the system for any length of time, probably more than 5 minutes, you'll have a plan of some nature, description. And you'll probably have multiple plans, and you will have had multiple plans, or you, your loved one, and your family over the years, and the people you've worked with have talked about plans ad infinitum, but they don't always materialize in anything. It's nice language and it's nice talking, and they come in all sorts of different shapes and forms, from IEPs to NASC assessments. I would argue would be a type of plan. It's a type of planning process. To people just having conversations with our daughter. We have all manner of health professionals that are always talking about the plan. It's just that you never see it. Nothing's written down. Nothing. It's just sort of what they think on the day is the plan, and then tomorrow they can just change their mind when they feel like it. So planning, you could say, is a very loose term. It's usually focused, certainly in the disability sector, on some sort of outcome. So either leaving school, an IEP, or learning, or getting through the school process, or a particular plan within an agency or an organization to achieve some sort of outcome, learn a particular task, or achieve a certain milestone, but it's sort of specific usually, and it's focused, and it's sort of in its best, it's a detailed step-by-step process of how to achieve something. It usually will have a time frame on it, which is helpful. The problem is not all the time frames are honoured, as you will know if you've been in this game for a long time. So people can set time frames easy enough, but honouring the time frames and sticking to them, that's a different story. But having a time frame on your plan is really, really important. Otherwise, it's just I don't know, pie in the sky dream, really. You've got to have some sort of time frame that you're targeting and aiming it for. A plan should also have details about who will do it. So writing lots and lots of plans, and I've seen this many times in agencies through evaluation processes, is you'll see the annual plan or the plan that the agency has for the person, and then the next year it's basically identical plan, the dates changed. And staff have left and staff have come, and times and this has happened and that's happened, and all these reasons have happened why the plan hasn't been actioned, but there's no one you could say necessarily to own that plan, to sort of champion it, to ensure that it does happen, because the assumption is that the plan will be owned by the person. That's the assumption, right? But the person that's in that theory, they have no power. The service user, no matter what people say, do not have power within service structures and systems. They're at the mercy of the staff, of the agencies, of the workers, of the people who run the place, you could say. And so unless someone owns the plan and champions it and holds it and carries it forward, you could say it's just a nice document on a bit of paper stored away on a computer now, not even a filing cabinet. And then many of the plans, many of the organizations, because they have to do so much of this planning, they get to the standardized process. We're going to do it in a standardized, routinized, prescribed way so that there's it's fair and even and consistent, And so what happens then is that the plan shapes the person's life, the document itself, the framework, the structure of the planning process becomes the driving force, and people have to fit into the plan. And you see this very, very routinely with needs assessment processes, which I would say is an argument as a type of planning process. But the plan shapes the outcomes, not the needs of the person. The document itself, the framework that's used. And so while planning is very, very important, and I want to make that crystal clear, we have to have clear plans that will enable certain things to occur, actions to be taken within a time frame with people who are responsible. There's lots of ways they can go sort of pear-shaped. Now, I would contrast that with this idea of visioning. And visioning is really at a much, much higher level, you could say. It's what do we want our life to look like? What do we want the future to be? What do we hope for? What do we dare to hope for in many instances? Because it can be frightening. It can be frightening to even get to the position as a family member where we are willing to hope, we're willing to believe that better would be possible and could be possible, because we are so caught up, we are so in the detail of the day and the detail of the moment, that it's very, very hard sometimes to stand back and go, okay, well, what could be? If it wasn't this, if we were to create something new, if we were to build a better future, what might that look like? And that's really what visioning is. Often we're asking people, or getting people to think ahead, like in big chunks of time. Much of the planning is done usually in 12-month blocks. But visioning, we're saying, okay, you've got to go past 12 months. We've got to get out there to, maybe 3 to 5 year framework to say, okay, well, what if we're going to build something that's going to take time? What would it look like out there a little bit? You could say. And as I've said, it's like, what would be ideal if we could have it how we would like it to be? What would be ideal? And it should certainly be much more than what currently is. And a lot of, again, contrasting visioning to planning, a lot of the planning is just building on what is today, you could say, incrementally building on it. Visioning says, okay, let's take a blank page, let's think about the future, and let's go, what do we want it to be? Forget about how it is today, let's think about what we want it to be and then build towards that. So sort of two terms, visioning and planning, that are often used interchangeably or even confusingly, perhaps, in our day-to-day world. So something to think about, something to try to get our head around. And we're just going to pause there for a moment and have a talk about that, see if there's any questions or comments. Okay, great. The next thing I'd like to do is play this little video for you. This is a mum, this is a parent speaking at a conference in Australia about the clarity of vision is the title of her talk. And she uses an analogy of a compass bearing, which I think is very, very, very powerful. And the vision providing a compass bearing for where she wants to head as a family. And I've thought a lot about this. I've used it in many, many different situations, and it's incredibly powerful. So this is Wendy Strove. It's about 15 minutes long. So we're going to play this video and then we're going to pause again and have a talk about it. Now, you may not agree with everything Wendy says. I just want a back disclaimer to go up front here. She's very clear on her thoughts. She's thought about this stuff in great depth. She's been able to articulate it and get it to a very, very tidy position, you could say. But that doesn't mean you will necessarily agree with everything she says. So please don't get caught up on things if what she says irritates or a bit rubs against and think about the big points that she's making. And the idea of the vision being a compass bearing into the future. So let's hear from Wendy.
Good quality of life for people with disabilities doesn't just happen by accident. There's a long history of provision for people with disabilities that pretty much tells us how things will work out if things are left to chance or to existing human service systems. It may happen for particular individuals as a result of a clear vision and determined action. And it's that vision of a better life that will actually make the difference. Now, some people actually hear the word vision and they think it sounds a little bit, evangelistic. Hallelujah, I've had a vision. To me, it doesn't mean anything like that. It means having a very clear idea and some positive dreams about what we want for somebody's life. All of us dream all the time for ourselves and for the people that we care about. But sometimes some of those dreams are so basic and so fundamental that we hardly even bother to articulate them clearly. However, when most people are asked about what kinds of things they think are the basic elements of what they would say is, good quality of life, they usually say very similar things like relationships with, friends, acquaintances, and having people that actually care about us. Having a place that you feel reflects who you are and is your private space that gives you a sense of security. Opportunities to pursue skills or interests and to actually choose the things that you like to do and to have opportunities to do those things. They talk about making a contribution and being seen by other people as having gifts to bring to others. To a certain extent, they talk about, having enough money to live in security and not living in poverty, and ideally having good health. And if these are some of the things that most people kind of identify as being contributors to good quality of life, we could say that they're actually pretty ordinary dreams. They're pretty everyday things. And having a vision for a person with a disability, for me anyway, is really about claiming for that person the right to the same kind of ordinary everyday dreams that most people hold dear. So put simply, it means believing that a person with a disability can have the same kinds of dreams and will need the same kinds of things in their lives that other people do. A vision will reflect a view of what is possible for people with disabilities that reflects quite an altered mindset from what's commonly out there in our community. From birth, the idea of separate paths can become quite entrenched for people with disabilities. The typical kid in the neighbourhood might go off to preschool, playgroup, go off and play in the park. A child with a disability might find their early years filled with things like early intervention and therapy. Adults might attend workplaces, they might socialise with their co-workers, they might join sporting teams and have people over for barbecues and that kind of thing, whereas an adult with a disability may spend their lives in congregate care facilities, attending work training programs or independent living programs. And these essentially separate paths can be maintained throughout life and can be seen by many people to be the inevitable reality for people with disabilities. So people with disabilities end up congregated together and they end up in disability-specific programs and separate from the rest of the community. And all glimpse of what's going on in that other land, in the schools, the shops, the workplaces, the clubs, the pubs, the universities, the teams, all of that's closed off. And the wider community's opportunities to know people with disabilities as neighbours and friends and workmates are also perhaps closed off for people. There's something that happens to our thinking where disability is concerned. We seem to think differently. When my son was young, I was urged again and again to take him off to riding for the disabled. I had to point out again and again that my son was actually terrified of horses and really disliked riding. But people were convinced, that if he got used to it, he'd really enjoy it. Now, I hate flying. No one has ever suggested to me that I should join an aero club. And that once I got used to it, it's a great experience, wonderful opportunity I'm missing out on. But there's a difference in the way we think about activities and places that are appropriate for people with a disability. I've actually had some quite strange looks recently when I've started to tell people that I'd like Alex to join some woodworking groups when he leaves school, because he loves woodwork. And he might not have a great deal of language, but he talks constantly about going to woodwork. Now, the strange looks that I get are because people understand that Alex probably won't do very much of the woodworking. He won't know how to use the machines. And he would probably need very, very substantial support to fulfil any part of that role. But I could point out, of course, that riding for the disabled, he wouldn't be on the horse on his own. He'd have somebody riding the horse or guiding the horse or helping him stay on the horse. The difference is riding for the disabled is a disability-specific environment, so people automatically accept Alex can be there. It wouldn't be a natural environment for him. He hates horses. The woodworking group is a much more natural environment for him, however, because he loves the machine and, even with very limited language, expressed a direct desire to be there. Now, he could be just as easily supported there as he could be at riding for the disabled. But because the environment hasn't been specially set up for a person with a disability, it's much more difficult for people to get their heads around. So what happens is society's expectations about where people with disabilities can be and where the support can be delivered starts to impact on people's whole lives and experiences. So people's actual interests or desires become irrelevant when we've already determined the places they can be. When we start developing a vision, we shouldn't be automatically placing limitations on the ideas that people might have around where people could go or the things that they could do. And that around the world we are seeing individuals with all kinds and levels of disability having work and living in their own homes and enjoying social connections and the other ordinary things that other people see as the important elements of a good life. Now, I think it's really imperative for every one of us here to actually believe that that is possible, because articulating that vision of those possibilities is the necessary first step. What does this person want? Some people with disabilities may be able to actually articulate some of their own goals with help and support. Other people may just need a little bit of guidance about the things that they might choose. So you could start with just some of those general core issues of the things that we think make up a good life, but you could also start to explore possibilities in much more individual detail around a particular person. Looking at what kinds of things you're going to try and bring into a person's life, who might help, how will you go about it, when, what will you need to do, and so on. And for many people, it will be actually quite helpful to write down a vision statement. I know we did this with our family, and it doesn't seem like it's such an important step, but Alex was unable to articulate his dreams, so we started with the things that we know most people, value in their lives. But it was actually quite surprising the effect of formalising that by writing it down. It really made us clarify our thinking, and it made us make sure that we had shared ideas about what we were about. And it also helped us with the next stage, which is communicating the vision to other people and enlisting support from others. So when we first did this, Alex was very little. Many of the statements were very general things like, we want Alex involved with lots of different people, and we don't want him to be lonely or isolated. We want him to have friends and acquaintances like other people. And we wrote things like, we want Alex to be seen as a person with an individual personality, strengths as well as needs, and gifts to bring to others. It was a big part of our vision from an early time that Alex be known as Alex Strove, not another person with a disability amongst a group of people with disabilities. And for us, articulating that part of our vision, writing that down, has led us to choices where Alex is met as an individual and not considered in the context of other people with disabilities. So when it came to choices, did we want early intervention delivered in a segregated service, or did we want him to receive whatever service were appropriate to him to get the best experience out of preschool and delivered in a preschool setting? The choice for us was obvious, it was the second. Did we want him enrolled in a special school, early enrolment at the age of 4? No, but perhaps some extra time at preschool and lots of orientation and a tailored approach to getting into school, that would work. Because the choices that you actually make are facilitated by the clarity of your vision. And so after putting our vision for Alex on paper, we began to talk to people that we knew might be significant in our journey with him. So we started to tell people like my parents, who thought we were lunatics, about our vision for Alex going to, the regular class in an ordinary school and that kind of thing. And they almost, I think, felt compelled to drag us into their previous generation's tragic model of disability. But if you're absolutely crystal clear in what you want and you articulate that vision every time the opportunity arises, people do come to understand that you're after a good life. I know we might quite often have said things like, I don't know how we're going to get there yet. But people have always known where we're heading, what we're aiming for. I think most people here have probably at some stage had to justify the choices that they've made to others. But in having a very clear vision, you can consistently communicate that direction that you're going in. As Alex progressed through school, some people began to just simply understand the kinds of things that we would and wouldn't find acceptable. At a recent meeting in our school, the principal asked what we saw Alex doing after he leaves school next year. I didn't have a chance to say anything before a woman from the Department of Education piped up and said, well, I assume he's going to be out in the community pursuing the things he's interested in, doing and learning with the support that he needs. I looked at my husband. He looked at me. We didn't know this woman. We hadn't spoken to her. We thought it was fairly exceptional. She knew of our vision even if she didn't know us and she didn't know Alex. And she had just articulated what was the expectation. Another thing that happens is that some unlikely people can come on board, and sometimes the people you expect to be your supporters and the people who are going to be there for you aren't. So a parent might know, for example, that they might want their child in a regular class, for instance, but face a wall of professionals that says, no, the support unit's over there. Or a person wanting tailored support for a young person in the community might find that the only provision is a congregated adult day centre in their town. So it's vital for us to recognise that if we do seek a good life or an ordinary life for people with disabilities, we are moving against a powerful societal current that will constantly try to drag you back to the separate path that is deemed inevitable for people with disabilities. And that set path is limiting where your vision is enabling. Clarity of vision allows us to evaluate choices that may be placed before us. So you get to ask a simple question of things. Will this bring the person closer to the desired outcomes? If I was evaluating that choice of writing the disabled, I would say that's not a grouping that is going to work for Alex, and it's also not pursuing his interests. At pivotal points in a person's life, it might actually be a good idea to kind of re-examine and reassess what you're doing. None of our fundamentals for Alex have ever changed. We certainly see areas from time to time where we need to redouble our efforts, or we need to maybe reassess a choice that we've made that hasn't been working so well. So vision is not a static thing, it's an evolving, ongoing thing. At present, we're seriously thinking about life beyond school. In our vision, if Alex is going to have a life that includes a lot of freely given relationships with people and that they get to know him as Alex instead of any old person with a disability, It becomes crystal clear for us that as he's on the brink of leaving school, he must, despite his level of disability, be joining in with other people in the ordinary community activities, sharing the things that interest them. So we'll be asking things like, what does he like? Where will he meet people who share his interests? If we can bring people into his life through some work role, then he needs to have one. What could that be? Could we start a small business? Now, these are fundamentally different questions from what program exists. Programs and services are not the answer. Programs and services may provide some funds and some supports, but they cannot alone result in the kind of life you want. Unfortunately, for many people with disabilities, programs and services supplant their lives. People end up having nothing else in their daily lives. They have programs instead of a life. Without a vision of a positive and varied and rich life as a guide, families can unfortunately misdirect their energies, insisting that more funding, more services, more programs are what is needed for people with disabilities. But as they're commonly delivered, these things drive out a person's vision. They drive out any hope of dreams and the involvement of families and the building of a natural supportive community around the person. Then, of course, they're seen to need more programs and more services to fill up the gaps in their life where they're disconnected. And it can be a really vicious circle. It'll be what your vision actually makes of those services, or in spite of those services, or even without those services, that makes the difference. And many people who have achieved supported lives in the community have done so in spite of the services provided rather than as a result of them. We get lots of advice all the time, often loaded with professional opinion and limiting statements about the nature of a person's capacity. But it's the clarity of our vision that allows us to see through some of this. Sometimes the obstacles in the way will be massive and you can't move forward in the direction that your compass is indicating, and you may be forced to divert. A vision alone cannot guarantee anything. It must be accompanied by constant vigilance and lots of work to keep it on track. When you're choosing inclusion, you are choosing the more difficult path. There are always going to be times when obstacles are placed in the way. It doesn't mean you ditch the vision. It means that you need it more than ever to work out other paths to get to the outcomes, and it means work. People with disabilities and families, I think, are in the best position to consistently articulate a vision. Others, like workers or professionals, are likely to get bogged down in day-to-day organisational aspects of the work, and their loyalties may be divided. But people with disabilities and families can have their eyes on the compass, and the vision keeps the destination in mind. The vision can't be used on its own. It must be used to examine choices, to bring people in to help, to provide guidance around barriers, to reject inappropriate choices, and to work against opposition. The leap of faith, the trial and error, and thinking differently, and the determined pursuit of that got people into better situations where waiting for a service to provide something would see you reach 100 years old and never get it. You may receive little encouragement and even some derision. And at times of difficulty, the clarity of your vision can be a source of inspiration to you and something to steel your resolve. You need to find others who share your vision. What can be so wrong about wanting a good life for a person with a disability? Wanting the same ordinary things that everybody else has. Remind yourself that it is being achieved for people around the world, and we know that there are people living much richer and rewarding lives. So if this is what you really want and you believe it is possible, you have yourself a real authentic compass. It'll point to that which you most want, and it's a reliable means of charting your course.
Okay, so thanks for that, Cordell. Thanks for that conversation. That was I think and you can watch that video of Wendy's again at any time. So it's downloadable. We can get you a link for it if you want to watch it. And we suggest that you do. I suggest that you do, and share it with others. It's a very powerful tool. So with the time that we've got left, what I'd like to talk about now is just some practical application. How do you do this? Practically speaking, what can you do if you're in this position where you've realized, actually, we need to sharpen our vision here, or we don't even have a vision, we better get one. And here are some of the common ways that this is done. And we're going to just go through each one bit by bit. So the first one really is conversation and dialogue. It's been around, 50,000 years possibly. We know that there were Aboriginal people in Australia 40,000 years ago. They were talking to each other. They were drawing pictures on caves. They were saying about this and that in the future, and you could go here and here's a water hole and there's this thing. And so, vision was being shared verbally amongst people as long as really there's been verbal conversation with folks. So really it's the oldest, most reliable way of communicating and discussing things with people, but it means we have to actually create the space to stop and do it. It's very, very powerful, and creating vision can't be done without dialoguing, but sometimes it's difficult to find the space when your life is hectic, when your life is flat out, if you're not getting sleep, if people are running in different directions and it's just so busy. How do you carve out the time to just sit down with your loved ones or your family members and start talking about this sort of stuff? But let's not forget that it's probably one of the most powerful ways to go about it. The second way, I term DIY, do it yourself, you could say. And so we've created a bunch of tools and resources that help people to just sort of sit down and start thinking these things through. So here's an example of one. Building a vision. It's a series of A4 sheets, and it just asks questions, and you just set them on your desk, on your table, on your bench top, and you use them as a dialogue. You use them as a place to engage. You can put your thoughts and ideas down. There's obviously many more questions in this first one. It's just a little screenshot, and then you can engage that input from other members of your family, from your partner, from the kids, from other people you know. You can say, well, what do you think's most important for, whoever the person is, and you can use these tools, you could say, as a way of interacting and dialoguing with these ideas internally, but also with others. Really, really practical, really, really helpful. And if you just sit them around, as you start to think and as you start to ponder, and then you go about your life as normal, and then what you'll find is you'll be doing something very mundane, and then another thought will pop into your head, and you'll go, that's right, there's that. And you can go back and pop it down on the sheet or make a mental note to add it later. So in that way, you can build up this vision across time, you could say. So very practical, very helpful, very useful. And Wendy talked about a sort of a vision statement, we've got other sheets that do that as well. So, okay, well, here's the statement, our vision statement for what we want as a family. So we've got a bunch of tools like that at Allies Aotearoa. Just reach out, let us know if you're interested. We can certainly provide those. The next and very, very common methodology that's been used, particularly for the last, say, 40 years with people with disabilities, is using graphics and pictorial sort of forms, you could say, to communicate ideas and create a future. And this again, we can link it back to ancient cultures, to the Egyptians used to draw hieroglyphics, can't pronounce the word, but we've all seen those sort of images and graphics on walls and photos of them. We've seen Aboriginal rock carvings and paintings. We've seen for eons, for thousands and thousands of years, human beings have created or shared ideas and thoughts in pictorial form. And really what this method is just a modern version of that, you could say, where we gather people together, we bring them together, and we get them to talk, and then we have someone on hand who has a gift with turning those words, those thoughts, ideas into graphics and into pictures, and it gets recorded on paper. And it's just an incredibly powerful process. It's a facilitated, so you could say creating a vision in a way that's facilitated by others, another way of thinking about this. And then you end up with, you could say, a poster or a big sheet of paper that has all your ideas and thoughts down on it. And that becomes, you could say, the vision. You could say, well, at least pointing to what all those different elements are. Here's another example of what we'd call a path plan. So very, very similar process. You can see on the right-hand side of the picture, it says vision, literally vision 2022. And this path plan wasn't done in 2022. It was done in about 2018. I can't remember exactly, 2018, something like that. And it's okay, what's life going to be like 4 years ahead? What is the future for Luke? What's the ideal future for Luke and his family at that point of time into the future? So a way of casting that forward, you could say, and then drawing it down, because Luke he's not very good with written words. He's not very good with verbal language. He's not very good with reading. So any sort of plan or document that's in a written, typed format is of no value to Luke at all. But this he has up on his bedroom wall, and he can point to it and he can show people things because he gets it. He gets it at a pictorial form. Incredibly powerful. So that's another sort of way of visioning, is you could say a facilitated process using graphics and pictures and things like that. So that's another thing to think about and to consider. Another form, a very practical form, is what's called roles-based planning. Now, I know earlier I made a distinction between planning and vision, but this, in a sense, is slightly different. So what roles-based planning is, and we've got lots of material on this, it's a very, very powerful tool. And it starts to think about people's lives, not in terms of activities, which is often what's happened when we're planning. We're thinking, okay, how do we create enough activities to fill up this person's life? Or how do we do things at an activity level? Yeah, you'll hear that language all of the time, I'm sure. If you've been in this field for more than 5 minutes, you will have heard people talking about activities ad infinitum. So this is a different idea. It's to say, okay, what roles? How do we help this individual build active roles within their life and within their community and within their society? And it's a powerfully different way to approach the future for people, not on an activity basis, but on a roles basis. And then the tool lets us break up, you could say, or at least theoretically open up people's lives and say, okay, what roles within the family domain can we identify, harness, build, and grow over time? What roles within the spiritual domain? What roles within the work domain? What roles within the learning, which would include education, things, sports and leisure? So it helps us sort of open up and think about the person's life from a role perspective as opposed to an activity, I'm receiving services perspective. Now, all of the people I know that use this methodology, they need help to do it. They can't just walk out of their house and go off and do all these things themselves, but it helps to create that framework for people to think, okay, well, this is what we're after. This is what we're trying to go for. And it's very powerful in terms of shaping the staff input into people's lives. Because often what we find is people's lives, despite the help and despite the staff they have, they don't necessarily make a lot of progress because the staff aren't actually working on progress. The staff are just doing day to day. And what we need is people who can actually work towards the outcomes that have been identified. And so these tools are not only helpful for us as families, for our loved ones, but they're very powerful when we're talking about staff and directing and guiding staff. And then another very, very simple, very practical way to create a vision is what we would call just a vision board, where people sit down, they get pictures, I can cut them out of magazines, or they pull all these bits together in their life and they just stick them on a big board. You know, above my desk, you can't see it, but I've got like a pin board above my desk. And it's not a vision board, but it has a lot of things on there that are very important and meaningful to me. Yeah. And this idea is very simple, very, very practical. And I've seen many people living with disabilities do this to great effect, because we give them a set of things, you know, books, magazines, articles, all sorts of stuff, and then let them pick out the bits and stick them on, and then have a conversation of, why is this important? Tell us about this. Tell us more about this. What's this bit about for you? You know, and so that's helpful for individuals. It's also very, very practical and helpful for families, because if you can imagine it, if you can picture it in your mind's eye, then you can do it. That's the truth. That is the absolute truth. What stops the vast majority of people is they can't picture where they're going. They don't know where they're heading. And because they don't know where they're heading, they just stuck, well, not necessarily stuck, but they're sort of doing the same thing again and again and again. If we want different, we've got to be able to picture what it is first, and then we've got to be able to aim and direct our time, energy, resources towards it. So again, another very practical, simple, easy way. Now, all of these things will bring emotions. They'll all bring intense feelings at times, because like I said earlier, I know in our life, things can be so uncertain, they can be so variable, that to think what will it be like in 5 years' time is like, man, that keeps me up at night sometimes. I'm just like everyone else. I can think, sheesh, like, what is it, But with our daughter, I know she is not living with me for the rest of her life. That is not going to happen. We're going to create a situation where she has her own life independent of my wife and me, because she needs that and we need that. Now, I don't know what that exactly looks like yet, but we know that it's going to happen. We know that she's going to have friends, and we're going to do everything and continue to do everything we can to surround her and build networks of friends and people in her life, so her life doesn't shrink to just being about our family. As important as that is, we'll always be there, but we need her to have a much wider. So we know that's a part of her vision in her future. She's going to have some form of work or job, and ideally a career. She's got a good mind, our daughter. We're very blessed. She's very blessed to have a very good mind, even though her physical body lets her down so terribly. But so a career, a job, a way to give, a way to use and contribute to society and those sorts of things. Faith to her is really important. She has her own faith and belief system, and so we want to see her be able to pursue that and activate that. And we want her to have fun and go on holidays. And so we've got this sort of vision of what life will look like, even if we don't have all the details worked out, and at our stage, she's 17. I think that's fine. That's okay, and as people get older, as she gets older, we can sharpen it and shape it, and she'll be a huge part of doing that all herself, in a sense, with just whatever support she wants from us. So we've got to create it. It's family business, I say to parents. All right, this is family business. No agency, no organization, no government, no policymakers, no anyone can tell us what the vision of our life is. We have to accept responsibility for that, and we have to be the ones that create it. Now, if we need help and we want help, reach out. You can get me easy enough. Oh, done there. Here's all my details, and I know that Carol and Lisa will have those as well, so you can reach out at any time if there's anything you'd like to talk about. But know that it's possible to create a vision, know that it's possible to have a different future than what it is you're living today, if you want that, and know that if you can imagine it, I guarantee you can do it. I guarantee you. So every time we've done this with people, what we've found usually is that what they thought was a long way off, actually, once they named it, articulated it, and described it, they could get there quite quickly. And then also the horizon just opened up again for another layer of possibility, you could say. And let's do that again. Okay, what's next? Another layer of possibility. And so life grows exponentially once we start on this pathway. So kia kaha, wish you well, and let's talk about all of that.